to the show. How you doing this morning? You doing all right?
I'm doing fine, Jamal. I wished I'd known it was more formal, so please forgive my casual
No.
attire.
It's not formal. No, it's not. I swear it's not formal. The first day I did my show, I did it in a suit because my thought was I want to have this new iteration of the show to be kind of a special occasion. And then the first week was so screwed up that the second week I ended up wearing a suit. Somewhere along the way, I was like, I like this. I like walking around in a suit. It makes me feel like I'm doing something. It makes me feel important. So no, it's not formal. Perfectly fine. This is my own, I don't know, my own thing that I ended up doing.
Well, you look great. I'm just going to say you look great.
Well, I try. I try to be sharp. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Always appreciate kisses on the ego. Man, I am so happy to have you here. I got to be honest. You have been one of the guests that has informed my workable point of view on this issue. Because, I'm a lefty for the most part. At the very least, that's my friend, the economic left. But I would call myself a reality-based lefty. And if there's a problem that we're dealing with, and I got to be honest, you're not the first person we talked to for immigration. And I came away with the same assessment that our system is broken, fundamentally so, through and through on this issue of immigration. And it's broken in multiple areas on the issue that neither political party really touches. And as you pointed out last time, the bill that Joe Biden put up did nothing to fix it, or would have done nothing to fix it. I want to get your take on, because Kamala Harris turned around and she was basically boosting the same bill. And I want to lead into this conversation on why that bill that they put up wouldn't have done the job to fix immigration.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty straightforward proposition, Jamal. And go back to the base language of the Immigration and Nationality Act, which is our law that governs, entries into the United States, deportations from the United States, and processes in the United States for immigrants. That law is very clear that everybody who comes here illegally, it doesn't matter whether you're at, JFK, it doesn't matter whether you're, crossing the Rio Grande.
Right.
Every one of those people is supposed to be treated the same way as an applicant for admission to the United States, even if you have no interest in formally applying. Mm-hmm. And if you are inadmissible to the United States, you are supposed to be detained. You're supposed to be detained from the moment that you are encountered up until the point that you are either admitted to the United States, granted asylum, or removed from the United States. And the reason that we have this huge surge of people coming over, or that we've had this huge surge of people coming over the southwest border, is because the Biden-Harris administration refused to comply with that detention mandate. Nearly everybody who came here illegally, or everybody who didn't have proper documents, about 88.5%, were simply allowed into the United States. Some of them were paroled, which puts them, on a fast path to getting a work authorization. Some of them were simply released into the United States. And unfortunately, throughout that entire process, there was no real ability to vet them. If you apply for a visa abroad, you go through a full vetting, you hand your passport to the consular officer, you're told to come back in a day or a day and a half. They'll ask you some questions. Maybe they'll ask you for a police letter. And only then are you actually given the visa. And at that point, you still have to apply for admission to the United States once you get here. But so because so many people were released into the United States, it became well known that if you showed up and you didn't have proper documents, one, you'd be able to evade that vetting. But two, you'd probably be released in the United States. You'd probably get the chance to work here, and you'd probably be here indefinitely, if not forever. So that really was the issue. Fast forward to the Senate border bill, which was introduced again at 7 o'clock on a Sunday evening. The key flaw of that bill was that it simply codified all of those catch and release procedures. It gave the Secretary of Homeland Security, who was actually being impeached in the House at the time, unfettered discretion to release individuals into the United States and put them into a fast-track asylum process in which they wouldn't even have to file an application. So that simply would have encouraged more people to come illegally. Now, it did have a cutoff for if 5,000 people were apprehended over, on average per day over a 7-day period, that we would, make it harder for people to apply for asylum. But even at that point, up to 1,400 people, actually 1,400 at least people, had to be allowed to the ports of entry so that they could file asylum claims. Now, you do the math. 1,400 people over a 7-day period is 9,800 people. You multiply that by 52, and that'll tell you that you're going to get, about 500,000 plus people who are coming just through the ports, even when the border is shut down. So, these are really the key flaws that were in that bill. And unfortunately, few in the press bothered to read through the 380 pages of that bill. And even if they did, they probably weren't likely to find those little Easter eggs that were buried within the bill, because they weren't on page 1. They were on page 91 and 181 and things like that. So, the entire thing was a canard. And, most in the press, plainly you're an exception, but most in the press really weren't that curious. They were perfectly happy to listen to people tell them what was in the bill rather than look at it themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I always consider my job to be context, that oftentimes media drops context, which pushes people in a particular direction in regards to a certain belief set that is not necessarily backed by the underlying reality of it. They're just given the surface thing of it. So, I always appreciate bringing on guests that can kind of get into the details of those things. Donald Trump's plan, however, he has talked about using the military in order to take people out of the country. I never understand why Donald Trump doesn't invoke Obama. Obama got rid of 3 million people. They were calling him the deporter in chief because he was so efficient at getting rid of people outside of the country. Trump never uses him. In fact, Obama did better than Trump in getting those people out of the country. And I know COVID came into play, so many people didn't necessarily come during parts of Trump's term, but all things being equal, the policies that Trump put into place apparently were working. Joe Biden undid all of them under this notion of being, I'm different than Trump, even on the issue of immigration. And when it hit the skids, then he did something about it as the election was coming into play. From your point, is it possible for Trump to use the military in this way? He's going to evoke some kind of emergency act that gives him certain powers to use the military, or for that matter, the police force in this regard. Is that legal? Is that something that he can actually do?
Yeah, and again, you talk about your job as context, and context is needed here. The military has been activated at the southwest border ever since 2006, when President George W. Bush initiated something called Operation Jumpstart. National Guard were sent to the southwest border to monitor the border, and they, would often fill an ancillary role in which they would, transport migrants. They didn't actually physically arrest anybody. And with respect to detention, we know that under Obama, the military actually did detain families in 2014 who had come to the United States illegally, most famously at Fort Sill in Lawton, Oklahoma. But there were other military bases on which families were held. So the idea of using the military isn't some, wacky Trump invention. This is something that serial administrations have been doing for the last 18 years. It's also important to note the fact that under the state of Texas's Operation Lone Star, which is their effort to bolster Border Patrol resources, they've stationed Texas National Guardsmen, and other National Guard units from other states have come down there to help them out to do that same role. They are down there monitoring the border, and when they see somebody coming across, they call Border Patrol agents. We've only got about 17,000 Border Patrol agents for a 1,954-mile border. They work 50-hour shifts. So at any time, there are only about 1/3 of those people, or about 5,500 agents who are actually on the line. So those National Guard troops, do what they do when we send them abroad. They have the great, high resolution binoculars. They're scanning the border, and they can call out Border Patrol agents when they come. Now, there's one other thing that Trump did with respect to the military when he was president. And that is that in 2019, after he had negotiated a border wall construction bill with Congress, and you may remember this because Congress was shut down, the U.S. government was shut down for about 30 days. He declared a border emergency, and he directed DOD to use DOD assets to help construct impediments along the southwest border. Now, we talk about a border wall. If you've ever been there, it's really a fence, but it's also, lights and cameras, and most critically, fiber optic cable that runs along the border that allows the lights and the cameras and the sensors to all work. As soon as Joe Biden took office, he shut down all of that. If you go to the southwest border today, you're going to see, 7-8 foot tall piles of fencing panels lying on the ground, rusting in the elements. You're also going to see light towers that are incomplete. Literally, the wall ends in some crucial areas. So, again, it's perfectly acceptable to use the military to do this. Trump wasn't the first one that did it. And the reason why it's acceptable is because, the Corps of Engineers and other engineering units in the United States military aren't told to go dig walls and build buildings and knock them down just so they can get practice. They can get practice doing that construction work by erecting the wall. A wall is nothing more than a house that only has one side and no roof. But so, yeah, I mean, when you talk about the military, there are a lot of people who are going to scare the American public. At this point, Jamal, let me just be clear. I wasn't on the campaign. I'm not on the transition. I don't really know what all they're thinking about. But I know what we've done in the past, and I know what the military is good at. And, if you were to, put a gun to my kid's head and ask me what was going to be done, I'd say that they're going to do those same things. Again, they're going to support Border Patrol operations. Again, we don't have enough Border Patrol agents. They're probably going to help to, finish the fencing and, turn on the lights and the sensors and the cameras and everything else. And, they are going to potentially provide some limited detention space. But really, the best place to get detention space, isn't, and again, I'm not advising anybody. I'm simply telling you what I think. The military actually does have a lot of unused housing that they could, use to this purpose, and it would be perfectly acceptable. But when I was a judge, and people always say New York and then York, people don't think of York, Pennsylvania being a place where you get a lot of immigrants, and quite frankly, you really don't. But the York County Prison had about 600 beds that it made available to DHS at which they could detain people. County jails across the United States, offer that service. Now, fewer and fewer of them have done it under the Biden-Harris administration because the Biden-Harris administration put more and more and more impediments on, that detention. But the best way and the simplest way to detain people is not to build brand new detention facilities, but rather to use that space. It's good for the counties. It's good for the states because they get a slight premium for every bed that they let out. But it's also good for DHS because DHS doesn't have to erect new facilities, and it doesn't have to pay federal pensions to the people who are actually doing that detention.
Oh, that is fascinating. No, and I'm glad you gave that. Maybe because oftentimes there's this specter, this image that the military is going to be performing some kind of police duties in the United States, which, again, the military's function, their job is different than what the police are. So, yeah, it was freaking people out, to put it mildly. From your point of view, what do you think Trump was more, if you take out COVID, because I know COVID changed the immigration patterns that were taking place. But do you think Trump plan would be more successful than a Joe Biden's plan? And if so, why? I mean, I know Donald Trump spent his entire waking moment on the campaign trail screaming about immigration in order to nail home, I'm the guy that's going to do this. I'm the guy that's going to do this. Is it even possible to get rid of, 14 million people or something to that effect that they're saying are in the country illegally?
Those are great questions. And, I've been asked this one a lot lately, and it's given me the chance to really refine the answer. So here you go. The most important thing that Donald Trump, has done, will do with respect to immigration is simply get elected. It's created a paradigm shift that has allowed individuals who are unlawfully present in the United States to know that there's a possibility they're going to be removed. Now, even under the first Trump administration, DHS was, prioritized removals. First, national security threats. Second, individuals who had criminal convictions. And then third, other people, who, undermined the immigration system, people who engaged in fraud in order to gain immigration benefits, or people who had engaged in fraud in order to get public benefits. And in fact, he even put that in an executive order. Now, the one thing that was different, actually, there were two things that were different between Trump 1 and Biden. The first thing that was different was under Trump 1, if you're out, arresting those national security threats, those criminals, those people who had engaged in fraud, and you came across somebody else, it was perfectly fine to pick that person up too. ICE officers didn't have to turn a blind eye, nor should they, to people who had come here illegally. That changed under Biden. The second important thing was that, the Biden administration had similar priorities, but they did it in a much different way. Because before ICE officers could even investigate somebody who was here illegally and removable from the United States, including criminals, they had to consider whether there were any mitigating factors that worked against taking enforcement action, investigation, arrest, detention, prosecution, and removal from the United States. And amongst the things that that officers were told to consider was the length of time that person had been in the United States, that person's youth or, aged status, any, health factors. If you were dangerously insane and you committed a bunch of crimes because you were dangerously insane, that actually was a mitigating factor against taking enforcement action against you. And the last factor was whether you had anybody in your family who was a member of the military or who worked for the federal government. Now, when you add all of these factors in, it makes it impossible for ICE officers to do their jobs. If somebody's a criminal, go pick up the criminal. The law doesn't say consider, mitigating factors. Those may be relevant if you get into immigration court and you apply for some sort of relief that is discretionary, but it really has nothing to do with, the process of beginning it. And by the way, Jamal, that those, mitigating factors that you were required to consider, didn't end the moment that you took the person into custody. They continued throughout the entire immigration court case. So consequently, 700,000 people who were in removal proceedings, most of whom don't have any status in the United States, or cases were simply terminated because some mitigating factor came up and there was like a right, if you were the alien or the alien's attorney, to say, well, you should have considered this mitigating factor. We want you to consider it now. I mean, the entire game under the Biden-Harris administration was focused toward undermining undermining is probably too strong a word, but not enforcing the laws.
Wait a minute. I'm sorry. I have to interrupt. Did you say 746,000 people were picked up on crimes, but because there were mitigating circumstances that they were allowed to stay in the U.S.?
Yeah. Now, again, let me clarify that because there were 700,000 people who were removable. Some of them are criminals. I can't tell you how many because there's no transparency. A lot of those people, were arrested simply because they were here illegally.
I see.
But they were put into immigration court. They were probably removable. They probably didn't have any form of relief. And yet their cases were tanked, at the direction of DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, because they didn't fit within his priorities. Once a person's in immigration court, there's really no reason to terminate their case. If they're eligible for relief, let them apply. And if they get it, they get it. But if not, remove them. This was just a tragic waste of resources. And when you consider the fact that there are 3.2 million people in immigration court today, and you add another 700,000 whose cases were tanked, basically we lost 4 years of immigration court action. I mean, this is when you started, you said the immigration system's broken. It's not really broken, except to the degree that the current administration has been actively breaking it. So, you can get this process back on track. And let me just give you one factoid. I'm not even a fact, but it's factoid. About 300,000 to 500,000 people who are here illegally leave the United States every year, which is why when you go back, people tell you there are about 11.3 million people. We always use that 11.3 million, ever since. We don't really know the exact number. It's very difficult because you can't know people who are trying to hide. But we do know that about 300,000 to 500,000 will leave every year. That number is probably going to tick up exponentially, certainly under the first year of the Trump administration and probably all 4 years. People have been here, they've made their money, they can live a happy life back home. They're just going to take what they've got and they're going to go because they don't want to be detained. They don't want to go through removal proceedings. They don't want to have the indignity of being placed onto an airplane and sent back home. They just want to go on their own, and people always have done that. So, that's really the crucial thing. But if we focus on the criminals and we focus on the national security risks, we're going to make our streets safer. And if you do that and people see that people are being removed and people back home see that people are returning, one, people are less likely to come to the United States. And two, people are more likely to leave on their own. We're not talking about 300,000 to 500,000. We're probably talking closer to 600,000 to 1 million people who will leave every year.
What would be a more sane way to do this? I mean, I know you're pointing out if you're picking, especially if you're picking somebody up who's committing a crime, then yeah, of course, I don't take issue with kicking those people out to make safer streets. So fair enough, agreed on that front. But what would be, is it just enforcing the immigration laws as they are? Like, meaning if the system is being undermined, and I'll use the term undermined, I know it's strong, but I'll use the term undermined. It seemed that the Joe Biden administration was trying to be reflexively against Trump. And so they were trying to be the opposite, the anti-Trump, the bizarro Trump in this case. And it just so happened that immigration was one of the things that Donald Trump focused on. So the Democrats being reflexively against it was more permissive in it and trying to find ways to get around it. But it sounds like what they were trying to find ways to get around immigration law in and of itself. I mean, is it just immigration laws should be enforced, period? Or is it just we need more judges? Is it we need, what is the thing that we need to make the system work in a way that's sane, that also preserves the humanitarian element of immigration that is sometimes a part of it? Like, what's a sane way to do this?
Yeah, and I mean, that's actually, a great question. And for that, I'm going to go back to a district court order that actually found in favor of the Biden administration. You may remember that there were concertina wire barriers that were put in Texas under Operation Lone Star, and the Biden administration came in and tore some out. And then Texas sued and said, you can't destroy our property. We're not doing anything wrong. That case originally went to a district court judge named Aaliyah Moses in Texas. And Aaliyah Moses ultimately found in favor of the Biden administration, said they could continue to destroy it. And that was probably the only part of the decision that anybody ever read. But if you read that decision, it's actually a stunning indictment of immigration enforcement under the Biden-Harris administration. And I'm going to paraphrase her because I don't have the language in front of me. But what she said was that the immigration system, as dysfunctional as it is, would work properly if the laws were only enforced. And that really is true. As soon as you enforce the law, you provide people who are supposed to have due process with due process, you remove people who are, here illegally and under final orders of removal, you take criminals off the street, everything changes. And everything changes for the better because, one, people who are, thinking about coming here or who are here illegally are going to actually know that the law means what it says. Two, the American people will support that system. You and I have talked about Barbara Jordan, civil rights icon, who under President Clinton was the chairman of the Commission on Immigration Reform. And she said credibility in immigration comes down to three things. Those who should be let in are let in, those who should be kept out are kept out, and those who are here unlawfully should be forced to leave. If we have a credible immigration system, the American people will support immigration. If we don't, and I think this is the part that a lot of people on the left miss, if we don't have a credible immigration system, the American people will turn against it. And they'll turn against not just illegal immigration, but legal immigration. I believe in legal immigration. I've been an immigration lawyer for 32 years, and if immigration went away tomorrow, I don't know what I would do. But, we need to get back to that, lawful immigration system. And the only way you can do that is enforcing the laws. Now, there are things that, Congress can do to make it work better. Yeah, more resources. Right now, we only have 730 immigration judges handling 3.2 million cases. If you gave me 1,000 or you gave me 1,500, and it's pretty easy to find those judges because it pays really well. And I still get my pension till the day I die. It's a pretty attractive job to have. So we could easily increase the number. We'd move cases through the system a lot more quickly, consistent with due process while protecting the American people. The resources are key. The resources for the border, for Border Patrol agents, for ICE agents, for immigration judges, for clerks, for courtrooms. We can do all of this. This is the United States government. If we could send hundreds of millions of dollars to countries abroad, we can certainly spend a couple of bucks here in the United States to have an immigration system that works and that works for the American people.
Man, I always appreciate talking to you. I really appreciate your point of view on this. Andrew Arthur, he is a resident fellow in law and policy for Center for Immigration Studies. He is former counsel on the House Judiciary Committee, where he performed oversight of immigration studies. After 5 years at the House Judiciary, he was appointed to the immigration bench, serving 8 years as an immigration judge at the York Immigration Court in York, Pennsylvania. Andrew, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it.
Jamal, it's great talking to you, and all the best to your listeners.
Thank you very much.